We will continue with the last two lectures of this panel on memories of intransigence and religious violence in Europe. I will introduce Olaf Blaschke. It's really my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, which is not only one of the most brilliant specialists in religious history, but also a mentor for me and a friend, I think. Yeah.
We were laughing so
besides
much.
The bad jokes we usually make. He's professor at the University of Mu. His research topics include Catholic anti-Semitism, ultramontanism, Catholic masculinities, and history publishing houses. This the last one, the habilitación. He coined the concept second confessional age. We have spoken about that, to define the social fracture line of belonging to a confession in the 19th century and 20th century. Among his many books, we want to highlight Die Kirche und der Nationalsozialismus, zum Beispiel, and Katholizismus und Antisemitismus im Deutschen Kaiserreich. He's currently leading a project on ultramontanism and politics in Europe in the 19th century. This time, I will give you the floor. You have to make your presentation here, and I can move for you the PowerPoint if you need it.
Okay.
Welcome.
Javier, thank you very much. Okay, so I tell you when you click.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm obedient. Servant.
So thank you very much for your presentation and your invitation. I would like to show three things. First, that the distinction between three kinds of anti-Semitism is important. It remains important. It is between ancient anti-Judaism, you all heard about it, modern post-emancipatory anti-Semitism in the 19th century, which is sort of new, and racial anti-Semitism. So all these things, Judaism, modern anti-Semitism, racism, are to be distinguished. Christians participated in, and this is important, the important message, in modern anti-Semitism. Second thing to show is that modern anti-Semitism was, especially since the culture war, inscribed within 19th century Catholicism. And third, that this was not specific German, since modern ultramontane Catholicism was a transnational phenomenon. Its features of a double anti-Semitism, I will explain that later, can also be observed in other countries throughout Europe. So it has a European dimension. There was, this is what I want to say, a certain kind of uniformity, performed within ultramontane Catholicism. We had the word ultramontane, I think in two at least presentations already, just for those, but I think everybody knows that Ultramontes, beyond the Alps, it was this movement starting, let's say, in the 1830s. But you had the terminology is already in the 18th century. You mentioned that beyond the arts towards Rome, the centralization of the Catholic Church. There's much to say about it. I write an extra book about it, so this is enough. And we made a book about it together. So in this uniformity within ultramontanism and ultramontane anti-Semitism, this movement expanded since the early 19th century in the course of the religious revival, loyal to the Pope, loyal to Catholic parties, and loyal to Catholic media. Ultramontanism became hegemonic and helped to homogenize Catholic orthodoxy. But this helped also then to homogenize Catholic anti-Semitism. I present my argument in three steps. The first one was Catholic resentment only anti-Judaism, as a lot of people say, or should we call it anti-Semitism? The second, the uniform concept of double anti-Semitism, concentrating on Germany, that's what I want to explain. And the third step is Catholic anti-Semitism in Europe. So I make a comparison showing that the phenomena was relatively uniform and transnational within other European Catholicisms. So to the first step, was it just anti-Judaism? Yes. Or was it, or should we call it anti-Semitism. Most historians say it was only anti-Judaism. I think we should be sensitive enough to have a wide definition of anti-Semitism. The center, just to say name some authorities, the Center for Research in Anti-Semitism in Berlin and the Vidal Sassoon Center for the Study of Anti-Semitism in Jerusalem have good arguments to hold up the general view of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a general term for negative stereotypes about Jews. It comprises resentments and behavior which are directed against Jews as Jews, or against Judaism or Jewry, or against other phenomena because they are seen as Jewish. For example, you can say Jewish socialism, and then, This definition allows us to see a wide variation of phenomena. Anti-Semitism is the general term, but now underneath it, there are different variations. The most enduring variation is Christian anti-Judaism. It started in the early Christian times and changed in the course of the centuries. Anti-Judaism included an instrumental and a negative attitude towards Judaism. The instrumental attitude saw the church as the successor of Judaism. Maybe you can do one more? Yeah, that is fine. Okay. The synagogue was the old covenant, ecclesia, the new covenant. Christianity now was Verus Israel. The true Israel taking over the role of God's people. Jews should realize that they better convert to the Messiah who came to redeem them. Thus, they should be missionarized and enter the church. Since Augustinus, the existence of Jews was considered as witnessing the Christian truth. They wonder why they are still Jews. Why are there still Jews? They should realize that Jesus Christ came from, but no, they're still there, but they have a function. This is this instrumental attitude. They are witnessing the Christian truth. They had to be protected in order to fulfill their function, this function. Their existence was proof of the truth of the New Testament. Jews were blamed to have been the murderers of Jesus Christ. As punishment for this and for their unbelief, they have to live scattered among the other nations, not, but the other peoples. Christianity needed Judaism in order to legitimize itself and in order to profile its characteristics in the medium of this antagonism. Now, this is the instrumental attitudes. They were supplemented by a range of negative attributions and reproaches. One element is the resentment against the Talmud. Pope, is there not too much light on it? You can read it well. Is that okay?
It's fine.
Yes, thank you.
If not, I can turn on the lights.
But when they say it's fine,
okay.
Innocence IV forbade the Talmud. Is that even better? Huh?
Could it be better?
Yeah, for me it's fine. Innocence IV forbade the Talmud. Later it was frequently burned. A very secular reproach was that Jews were putting poison into wells. A truly religious element was the host sacrilege legend. It occurred already in the first millennium. The high time of this legend started after we had this word already, transubstantiationslehre. Transubstantiation teaching was made official with a doctrine in 1215 on the Fourth Council of Lateran, claiming that the bread was already really transformed into the body of Christ. Click.
Yeah.
Many cases were reported now. Jews either were aggressive against the host in order to torture Jesus again, or they misused the host for superstitious purposes. In this image, which you see now, you see a few Jews. This is from 1477 in Passau. and you see them torturing a host, and suddenly, maybe you can see the face of here, the face of Jesus appears. More popular was the legend that the hosts start bleeding when the Jews torture them. Since the 16th century, no, I tell you, thank you. Since the 16th century, no new cases of host sacrilege occurred. You know, the wonderful thing nowadays are remote.
Yeah, but we don't have here. Sorry, I asked for that, but we don't have. Sorry,
Okay.
sorry. I know that.
You are my remote control now. Okay.
Yeah.
So since the 16th century, there was nothing new. No new cases of host sacrilege occurred, but the memory lasted way into the 20th century. So there are some examples, like in Deggendorf, where they still make pilgrimages until recently. It was a memory of Jewish intolerance, to say it in the language of our conference. Today, it is the opposite. The opposite. It is a memory of Christian intolerance against Jews. Now you can click. Thank you. Maybe of more importance for our conference is that there were also martyrs who were commemorated, especially in the legend of ritual murder, the so-called blood libel. This is the last point on the paper here. The first case happened in 1144 in Norwich. Many others in the 13th and 14th century. Jews were accused of killing Christian boys in order to abuse their blood for whatever reason, superstitious reasons, for example. Violence and pogroms then always followed suit. The first blood libel in Spain happened in Zaragoza, where we just are. Now I tell you. Jews were accused to have crucified Domingo del Val in 1250, but the legend was only constructed in 1583, so much later. Historically, most important is the case of Simon of Trent in 1475. Trent belonged to the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. Since the 19th century, Trent belongs to Italy. In 1475, a boy named Simon, this boy here, he was missed. I mean, it happens all the time that little children are missed, but he was missed also. He was 2 years and 4 months old. It was a Jew. Let's say this. It was unfortunately, it was a Jew who found him dead after everybody looked for him. Unfortunately, it was Easter Sunday, and unfortunately, the boy was found close to this Jewish synagogue. Bad luck. So the Christian community accused the Jews of having murdered him. They were sure the Jews had abused the boy for satanic mass. I mean, you see all these instruments and how they torture him and so on. There was a trial, a long trial, official trial. And after having been tortured, Jews confessed the murder. The new element of this trial was that not only individual, like it was before, not only individual Jewish criminals, let's say, were sued, but that the court analyzed the ritual, what do they use, as they used to do, and the accusation now could be transferred to all the Jews. Trent was a turning point of the history of ritual murder. This is the next scenery, how it was illustrated in 1493. I don't know how the contemporaries saw, nobody can know how contemporaries saw this picture. Maybe they were also shocked at what's happening there. For us, it's like more like a resource. When we look at it, and it's a picture of 1493. The other one that I showed before, which is also Trent, is much more closer to our visual horizon and maybe more moving. Simon was later made a saint, and the day of his death, the March 24th, was included into the Roman martyrology until its removal in, guess when, 1965. Trent, and now you can click again. Trent in 1475 was also important because it served as a blueprint for other cases of ritual murder. In 1462, thus a few years earlier, the 3-year-old Andreas Oxner in Rinn, this is in Tyrol, was murdered. Can happen, these things. But the legend that he was victim of Jewish ritual murders was only constructed in 1620, exactly according to the template of Trent. Andal von Rinn, that's how people commemorate his name. Andal von Rinn was declared a martyr. In 1755, he was beatified by the Pope, and he got a place in the ecclesiastical calendar. From the 17th century on, the Jesuits staged a folk theater at this popular pilgrimage place. So you went there and saw this ritual murder again and again. It was cancelled only in 1954. In 1994, the bishop forbade the remaining cult around this martyr under von Rinn. Werner von Bacharach died in 1287 with the age of 16. Bacharach is at the middle of the Rhine. Immediately, the Jews were blamed of having committed a ritual crime. A wave of pogroms followed along the Rhine and the Mosel River. 50 years later, the legend was enriched with the story. Now, this was one story, but then it was enriched with the story. Jews killed him in order to get the host that he has just taken in church. They didn't only want the body and the blood, but also the host. So you see, the ritual murder legend was sort of blended with the host sacrilege legend. Several Werner chapels were built. They exist until today. The cult around Werner was only stopped in 1963. What you see here, again, all the time, is the image of the case of Trent. Now, guess when this painting was made? There's a question for you. I was...
the late 19th century, no?
You guessed late 19th century.
20th century.
You guessed 20th century. Okay, you did very broad. Any other guesses?
1867.
1867. That's what I would think too. But on the other hand, it is really, really detailed and very, very. It has its artistic merits. I mean, definitely. It looks a bit like the time of Caravaggio around 1600. But in fact, it is brand new. Now you can click.
Yeah.
It's from 2020. So nobody was right. 20th century was okay, but it's 21st century. Giovanni, I learned this, I detected this picture when I was preparing for this conference a week ago, 2 weeks ago, of course. Giovanni Gasparo, aping Caravaggio's style, is an Italian artist born in 1983. So now he's 38 years old.
Like me?
Okay, what?
Like me?
Like you. You know each other?
No,
Okay.
not yet. Not yet.
He's a brilliant artist. He makes a lot for the Vatican and so on. But this object, of course, is extremely contested. Gasparo says that he identifies himself with Simon of Trent. He feels like this boy, and so I don't want to go into the case of this artist. It is shocking and it is a shocking and impressive picture, and no doubt somehow moving more than something that is 400 or 500 years older. But it is also shocking that nowadays someone can produce such an anti-Semitic image, I think.
Yeah.
To come back to somebody ordered it and paid, and so we got this picture. To come back to it, there are a lot of Italian and French articles about this artist in the internet, if you want to know more, and if you know how to read Italian and French. To come back to our research, Christian anti-Judaism, with its instrumental and negative elements, had ancient roots and a tradition of 1900 years. It underwent frequent changes. In the medieval times, legends like the host sacrilege and the blood libel were edited. In the 19th century, though, this variation was considered medieval, not modern enough, too Catholic. In the course of the Jewish emancipation, anti-Semitism began to change rapidly, though the memories of intransigence kept being stable. This is what we had as a debate before, how anti-Semitism changed with Jewish emancipation. Wolfgang Benz, the editor of the eminent Handbook of Anti-Semitism, 5 volumes, a very recent and important synthesis, he says he distinguishes 2 things. For the period before 1945, Benz distinguishes between religious anti-Judaism and biological anti-Semitism. So 2 things. I think this distinction is not enough. There are blurring boundaries between traditional anti-Judaism and racial anti-Semitism, which was promoted only by radicals. Shulamit-Volkov is right in emphasizing that racism as a widespread ideology is overestimated. And you might have, in Tel Aviv, you might have met Shulamit-Volkov. Shulamit-Volkov, she's a professor there. Now, I think, and you can click, the distinction between the 2 types misses the genuinely new elements of post-emancipatory modern anti-Semitism. These elements were not necessarily racist. You could be modern anti-Semite without being racist. Rather, the arguments were that the Jews, being out of the ghetto now, could conquer the nations. They could rule capitalism and destroy commonly shared values. It was not only anti-Judaistic anymore, no, but went far beyond traditional religious stereotypes. It generated all the arguments of modern post-emancipatory anti-Semitism. But it was careful sometimes, or very often, to come too close to biological racism. I emphasize Catholic anti-Semitism was anti-Semitism. I say that because many apologetic researchers until nowadays say, and they use this word, of course, we admit there was Catholic anti-Judaism. No, this is not enough. It was modern anti-Semitism. Mixed with some anti-Judaism, sure, but it was modern anti-Semitism. My argument doesn't only aim at these sort of majority of Catholic historians, but also against the conventional claim that anti-Semitism in Germany was above all a Protestant phenomena. Just to remind you, Germany, this is Germany in the time of the Kaiserreich, was dominantly Protestant. This is all like reddish or yellow. Catholic represented 34% of society, Jews only 1%. And what you can see here also on the map is, Catholics blue and, it's like bluish. Catholics geographically lived on the fringe of Germany. In the Rhineland, Alsace-Lorraine, which just newly came back to Germany, then Bavaria and Silesia. It's always a bit on the fringe of Germany. And they're not only geographically lived on the fringe, but also socially. They were more rural than Protestants, and they were economically less successful. So what you had, this wonderful quotation of Macaulay, he's not quite wrong. There were fewer university professors and so on. I mean, Catholics had a certain inferiority. As a minority, they experienced discrimination, especially in the Kulturkampf. They realized that it was not very clever. Now, as a minority who is already discriminated, to start to discriminate now another minority which is even smaller, like the 1% Jews. But they still did. They did it as, this is important, good Catholics. It's not that they say, we can say, there is a contradiction between, a Christian and a Catholic here on the one side who shouldn't do their things, and that they are anti-Semitic, although they are Catholic. No, they were Catholic because they were good Christians and good Catholics. And the concept of double anti-Semitism helps us to understand this what looks to us as if it would be a contradiction. This is the second point now, concept of double anti-Semitism. The concept can already be found among contemporaries. Again, there's an article in this, one back. Yeah, that's enough, thank you. The article Anti-Semitism in a prominent ecclesiastical dictionary, this is this, Kirchliche Handlexikon, but you find it in every dictionary of the time. This is in 1907. It explains, it is common to differentiate a double anti-Semitism. The first opposes Jews as a race, together with everything which is related to it, including, therefore, the revelations of the Old Testament. This racial anti-Semitism is unchristian. The encyclopedia, like many other Catholic voices, openly rejected anti-Semitism. They said, but anti-Semitism, in this way is unchristian. It could be harmful to the church as well as to the Jews. Many historians conclude from this, anti-Semitism and Catholicism, they contradict each other. Now the same article continues. I tell you, these historians dismiss the fact that Catholics in those days held quite a different opinion. We have to take that serious. Many were hostile towards Jews precisely as a result of the duties and moral obligations of Catholics. They had no problem in constructing a Christian anti-Semitism. So let us look at the full version of the entry, in the Kirchliche Handlexikon. It just goes on, it's just the next sentence. After having demarcated unchristian anti-Semitism, it goes on to speak of acceptable anti-Semitism. And I read a bit of it. The other variation, there are two variations, double anti-Semitism. The other variation of anti-Semitism simply calls for special laws to protect the Christian population from the harmful advances of the Jews, wherever in media and economics and so on. Jews wield a pernicious influence on religion and customs, the social institutions, literature, and so on. And the article concludes, this is the last sentence here, this is the purpose of Christian anti-Semitism, to achieve a change. And the emphasis is in the original. So most openly, the author talks about Christian anti-Semitism, not anti-Judaism. And he calls this concept of distinguishing between good and bad anti-Semitism, double anti-Semitism. We talked in the pub about good and bad, or true and false liberalism and so on. They did the same with anti-Semitism. Racism was unappealing to Catholics. It appeared to be unchristian because of its ecclesiastical impetus. However, anti-Jewish patterns of interpreting social conditions were woven deeply into the modern Christian faith. Anti-Semitism contaminated Catholic consciousness. It was a part of the Catholic mentality at the time. The cornerstones of ultramontane defense ideology, which had become increasingly established during the pontificate of Pius IX, proved to be stable, and the concept of dual anti-Semitism, this one as well. The traditions went way into the 20th century. And it would be really wrong, and if you ever read that again in a text, that they only talk about anti-Judaism, and this would be just downplaying the thing. Many historians still do this, but Catholics definitely refer to their anti-Semitism, as you can see in the quote. And then they named it, and they even say it's an allowed, anti-Semitism is allowed. And anti-Judaism was, after all, not simply a theological issue. It served as a basis for dichotomous worldviews. The crucifixion, for example, was not just an historical event 2,000 years ago. It was something, it had a profound meaning and carried a timeless message of eternal salvation and eternal condemnation. And Jews do it again and again every day to every Christian. But the modernity of this anti-Semitism, in contrast to anti-Judaism, is expressed in the common phrase, and I quote Franz Hitze in 1877, a prominent social reformer who is well known in Münster, and he says, we do not want to undo the emancipation of the Jews. They always said we are not hating them, we don't want to do anything against them. We do not want to undo the emancipation of the Jews, but we only want our emancipation from the rule of the Jews. So to wish emancipation from the Jews is a modern thought. You could not express that before, let's say, 1830 or 1800. It made no sense as long as the Jews were not emancipated and in the ghetto. Hitler in 1877 could not use the term anti-Semitism. Why not? It was only this term anti-Semitism, it's a German invention, and then made a career in the whole world, was only coined 2 years later in 1879. That's a new terminology. But what did the people say before the term anti-Semitism was there? They could not distinguish a double anti-Semitism because the term was not there. The distinction was the same, but expressed in not hating Jews, but protecting Christians. So the saying was in German, Christenschutz, nicht Judenhass. Not hating Christians, but protecting this book by the Paderborn priest Joseph Rebert in 1876 expressed it in the title. Yeah, this is what I said, Christenschutz, nicht Judenhass. This is what it says. Anti-Judaism served as a bridge to modern anti-Semitism. Biblical sceneries were transported into the present time. Catholic anti-Semitism served to integrate the Catholic milieu. It was important, to protect against the majority society by promoting stereotypes against others, mainly against liberals. Dual anti-Semitism or double anti-Semitism served as a code distinguishing these ultramontane Catholics from those who were deviant, who had deviant views about religion and about modern society, like liberal Catholics, for example. Jews were by no means, and this is also important, I've done that game in the pilgrimage, Jews were by no means in the center of the Catholic thinking. They were not in the center of the worldview. I mean, you think of it because you spend 5, 6, 7 years or 30 years of your life in this topic, but it is not in the center of the worldview. Rather, Catholic resentment was directed against Protestants, against Freemasons, against liberals, against socialists, and so on, against capitalists. But among all these, the Jews played a supporting role. Mm-hmm. This scheme was still valid in the 1930s. It prevented many Catholics from being loyal to the persecution of Jews during the National Socialist regime. In 1938, for example, when the synagogues were devastated, in German, they called it Reichskristallnacht, a Catholic saying was, today the synagogues burn, when do the churches burn? So it's a very egoistic view on what happens to the synagogues. Now you may wonder if Catholic anti-Semitism was so modern. What happened to traditional anti-Judaism? I already mentioned that anti-Judaism was the bridge to modern anti-Semitism, but it also succeeded in becoming part of modern anti-Semitism. Anti-Judaism was modernized. It was modernized itself. It was revived. I concentrate on this issue, on the issue of the memory of intolerance and intransigence. To be more clear, the memory of alleged Jewish intolerance. And three things happened in the 19th century. First, maybe you can click. Yes, thank you. First, traditional ritual murder cases and their martyrs were kept being memorized locally. In Trent, in Bacharach, you've heard about these places before because I gave you the examples, and in other places on the local level and on the national level. The cult around the supposed martyrs like Simon of Trent, Werner von Bacharach, Ander von Rinn, it remained prominent. Maybe it became more prominent. We have to make somebody needs to make a PhD about it. The pious went on pilgrimage to these places. Officially, the devotion was stopped in the climate created by the Second Vatican Council, only then, in the 1960s. The blessed and saint martyrs were taken out of the liturgical calendar also in the 1960s. Now, I wanted to ask you, you can click once. Now, I wanted to, I think we talked about it yesterday, and Javier told me in Zaragoza, everybody knows this figure. Who is not from Zaragoza? 1, 2, 3, 4. There are some people who are not from. Who do you think this is? Who said that? Ah, you know it. Thank you. What?
I mean, I was slightly familiar, but because we spoke about it yesterday.
Yeah, you didn't know it, huh?
I didn't hear the answer.
Okay, you can click again. This is the chapel of Dominique de Val in the cathedral, and maybe we can make have a second visit tomorrow.
Yeah.
If you, I mean, I want to. This picture is not from me, but from the internet. And here you can see. It's written here, Santo Dominique de Val, and this must be a chapel or something. And here there's an explanatory text, and I'm looking forward to read it. So it's a chapel of Santo Domenico de Val in the cathedral here in Zaragoza, dedicated, the whole cathedral, this is dedicated to him. This is the 7-year-old boy who was allegedly crucified by Jews in 1250. You can see that it's not Jesus because he has something on. Jesus is usually naked. In 1250, and he's said to be he's the first ritual murder case in Spain, so called. And I read that he's no longer in the calendar also.
I don't know.
Well, you don't celebrate?
I don't celebrate.
You can make the next image. The second thing that happened in the 19th century, suddenly there was a wave of new cases. We learned all these things in 12th, 13th, 14th century, and now there was a wave of new cases starting 1840 in Damascus. The Dominican brothers were killed, 2 Dominican brothers were killed in Damascus, and the affair occupied politicians and newspapers all over Europe. In Spain, France, everywhere, and anti-clericalism raised and so on, and anti-Catholicism. Very prominent were cases in Tissa Esla in southern Hungary in 1882, the case of Xanten in 1893 in the northern Rhine area, and the case of Konitz in West Prussia in 1900. Anti-Semites exploited these atavistic cases for their propaganda. Xanten and Konitz were even discussed in the German Reichstag. And the third thing that happened, the third thing that happened, clerics, theologians, and other Catholics and non-Catholic anti-Semitic authors wrote books about cases of ritual murder, of supposed ritual murder, defending medieval cases and recent cases of the 19th century as true cases. Joseph Rebert was one of the prominent authors. So what I want to say is, what you see is there was a renaissance of blood libel legend, and even new cases appear. Plus, it is, and that you will see soon, refurbished with new anti-Talmudism. So Rebert, the head of the priest convict in Paderborn, in 1876 reissued the book of his bishop, Konrad Martin. Martin, as professor then in Bonn, had published a book against the Talmud in 1848. In this revolutionary year, he wanted to show that the Jews were clinging to the dirty teachings of the Talmud. Thus, their moral laws and behavior don't allow them to be emancipated. Christians were called pigs in the Talmud, and the Talmud allows to kill Christians. The ritual murder cases were taken as a proof. The star of the scene was August Rohling, professor of theology in Münster. In 1871, he published Der Talmudjude, the Talmudic Jew, and the book had 6 editions. I mean, it's not nothing, until 1877. Later, he wrote several books about the blood label, anti-Talmudism, and the reproach of ritual murder were closely connected. Rulling tried to prove from the Talmud that Jews were allowed to beat Christians to death. He talks about the, I quote, cannibalistic bloodlust of rabbinism. And his conclusion, never trust a Jew. So here we are in modern anti-Semitism. In 1883, Rowling emphasized Jews were not anymore mosaistic, but now Talmudistic. Thus, anti-Talmudism transformed the old image of Jews into a new one. It reconfigured anti-Judaism into a modern version in order to oppose full Jewish emancipation. And he said all the Jews are sort of Talmudist. Now, Rowling elaborated on the ritual murder cases of Trent and Damascus, Trent, 1475, and Damascus in 84, an old one, a new one, thus promoting the memory of alleged Christian martyrs and supposed Jewish crimes. But now, why in the world should Jews kill little boys, little Christian boys? You may wonder. He gave an explanation, 3 explanations. First, it is out of hatred against Christianity. They want to execute the murder of Christ again and again. This motive went along very well with the general attitude towards Jews. They were, among liberals, socialists, Freemasons, and so on, seen as enemies of the church, as promoters of anti-clericalism, and as responsible for the culture war. The second reason why they killed little boys, the second motive is magic and superstition. Jews were supposed to believe that Christian blood may help against certain sicknesses. And the third one, finally, there was the supposed belief among Jews that maybe Jesus Christ, in fact, was the Messiah. You never know. And if he was the Savior, it's good to have once in a while to participate a little bit in this Christian blood, in the holy blood, killing innocent Christians and consuming their blood, mixing it into the matzo bread of the Passover. There were many other Catholic authors in the late 19th century who subscribed to this approach. For example, Joseph Deckert, and I show you the title, Die 4 Tiroler Kinder, Opfer des Chassidischen Fanatismus, and 2 of the examples you know already, Simon von Trient and Andal von Rinn. And you always see der Heilige, der Selige, der Selige, so saint or blessed. So they really play a role in the calendar of the church and so on. Anti-Judaism supported modern Catholic anti-Semitism. The Talmud suggested to suck out Christians, so it is logical that it happens in business every day, be it the ordinary usury, be it the Rothschild, and the stock, or on the stock market. Rebbe talked about Christians as victims of Jewish slaughter, here, now, every day. Revived anti-Talmudism and anti-Talmudism reinforced the dualism between Christians and Jews in the 19th century. This sort of hate speeches, let's say, helped to stabilize the concept of dual anti-Semitism. Now, I think I went over time. What I wanted to show you is that this Catholic anti-Semitism in Europe is not only, this is, here you see the denominations, and here you see an easier way of it. White is only Protestants. We talked about Great Britain today. Gray is only Catholic, more or less, and light gray, like Germany, Switzerland, Netherlands, is mixed countries. And I just wanted to show you that no, I don't tell this and come to a conclusion that I skip that. How this same pattern of modern double anti-Semitism can be, there's evidence that it is happening everywhere in Catholic or mixed countries. So I come to a summary, if you allow.
Yeah.
And if you have any questions about Poland or Switzerland or whatever, I can just tell you. My main arguments are about the time span from middle of the 19th century to 1945. Within Catholicism, ultramontanism produced some sort of uniformity, not only in religious, cultural, political attitudes, in orthodoxy and orthopraxy, but also regarding the Jews. Modern anti-Semitism was embraced, but racism was the borderline. Second, ultramontanism as a transnational phenomenon helped to uniform Catholic anti-modern attitudes in the 19th century. It also helped to spread the concept of dual anti-Semitism in continental Europe, in Spain, in France, in Switzerland, and so on, Poland. And the last point, anti-Semitism served to cope with the impositions of modernity. It helped to find an identity. It helped to stabilize the in-group against the out-group, to confirm the role of priests as the legitimate interpreter of the world, and anti-Semitism served as a cultural code within societies like France and within Catholicism, where it built a minority, like in Germany. Catholicism, after the mid-19th century, gained an enormous degree of uniformity. This uniformity had an effect on the profile of Catholic anti-Semitism. The more ultramontane, it's like a rule, yeah? The more ultramontane, the more likely a Catholic was prone to follow the idea of double anti-Semitism. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Maybe you can do this.
I go down.
No, but I need you here to move the. Can you work for me and move?
Oh yeah, of course.
The
Yeah, I can
PowerPoint.
do that. I'm your remote control now. Yeah.
No.
Okay.
I'm not forcing you to
No,
make the
I-
presentation because it's okay. Where? Presentation. That should be okay.
No, you want it as a presentation.
Yeah, but now we are sharing, no, our views. Let me check. Yeah, we are
4 people.
4 people.
4 people.
It could be better, but
Could be worse.
it could be worse also. Let me take my conference. Where is my? I enter with in a rush, and I don't.
Too many tasks.
I'm sorry. No, it's not here. I forgot. I have lost my conference. That's wonderful news.
No, here's some papers.
Yeah, the papers. And it's here.
And do you want this, or does it go away automatically?
Ocultar, no? Yes. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. Many thanks for the presentation, Olaf, and for all the kind words and so on. Just joking. You're so nice. I don't deserve these words. So I start my presentation. I will give myself 10 extra minutes since I'm the no.
15 minutes.
50 minutes is okay. Okay. In the summer of 1867, in the context of the celebration of the 18th centenary of the martyrdom of Saints Peter and Paul, Pope Pius IX raised 25 new saints to the altars, 25 new models that would serve as inspiration for the battles that Catholicism was fighting at that time. Among them was the first inquisitor from Aragon, the Augustinian from Epila, Pedro de Arbues, who died in the 17th of September, 1485. From the wounds that ate assailant funded by conversion Jews and Aragon nobles had inflicted 2 days previously when they found him praying at the high altar of the Cathedral of the Savior of Zaragoza. In the same cathedral as San Dominguito del Val, like the good place for anti-Semitism. His dual quality as victim and agent of religious violence, as well as his connection with an institution such as the Inquisition, which had been discredited by a significant part of the population, meant that Arbues' canonization quickly eclipsed that of the others and sparked a bitter controversy in the international media. Much ink was spilled over the appropriateness of canonizing an inquisitor in a century identified with progress and tolerance, over the ideals and vision of the Catholic Church with this act embodied, and over the anti-Semitism of Catholicism and its hostile attitude to the modern world. The canonization of Pedro Arbues therefore provides a privileged window into the tension and preoccupations that crisscrossed the Catholicism of the 1860s. We will begin with an analysis of the case of Arbues in the context of the religious polemic of the 19th century and of the politics of the past that the Holy See promoted that decade, and then focus on 3 possible readings of the controversies surrounding Arbues: the schism between liberal and ultramontane Catholics, anti-Semitism, and the memory of the Inquisition. The 19th century was an era marked by the rise of great controversies in a world ever more interconnected by the circulation of people, ideas, and goods. Controversies quickly outgrew local and national settings, awakening transnational solidarities. Within these public quarrels, those that had a religious undercurrent quickly stood out. It seemed logical, given the centrality that the disputes about the role of religion in liberal society had in the public sphere. Those years witnessed heated debates over the compatibility between modernity and religion, such as the discussion between François Dissot and Jaime Balmes on Catholicism's contribution to civilization, and between Renan and Jamal al-Afghani on the compatibility, for example, on science and Islam. There were causes that quickly awoke international religious sympathy and solidarity, such as the Polish and Irish nationalist movement among Catholics and the defense of the pontiff's temporal sovereignty in what is known as the Roman question. These different affairs not only revealed tensions over the place of religion in the public sphere, but also demonstrated the existence of hate discourses towards a particular faith. This was true of various international anti-Semitic controversies, such as the mentioned Damascus affair or the Mortar affair and the famous Dreyfus affair. All these controversies also testify to the transnational dimension not only of religious hate, but also, as Abigail Green has pointed out, of the solidarity movement that they arose. In this respect, the controversy around the canonization of Pedro Arbues should be understood in a broader context. The singularity of Arbues' canonization is that it functioned at the same time as vehicle for both anti-Semitic and anti-Catholic discourses, being a controversy that illustrated the tensions that existed between different views of Catholic Church, since it served to convey discourses in favor of the Pope and his temporal sovereignty in the face of the threat from the Risorgimento. The canonization was seen in this respect as a challenge to the public opinion. The Allgemeine Zeitung des Judentums said the canonization stirred a strong feelings throughout the culture world, a great disgust that should come as a slap in the face for the conscience of the vibrant present. The German anti-infallibilist Ignaz von Dellinger wrote to his British liberal Catholic friend. Okay, perfect. In February 1867, that one can only be surprised by this gratuitous challenge to public opinion. The canonization of Pedro Arbues took place in the context of a double celebration: the 18th centenary of the martyrdom of St. Peter St. Paul, and the canonization of another 24 saints, who represented various moments in the history of the Catholic Church, from the early Christianity to the evangelization of the Americas. The Holy See sought reference from the past that helped it to assert the leadership of the Pope and the global dimension of Catholicism. This politics of the past drew from the growing Catholic fascination with the Roman Empire, and more specifically with the early Church. The rediscovery of the Roman catacombs and the promotion of an image of a martyr church thus allow equation between past persecution with those the papacy and the Catholic Church were then experiencing at the hands of Italian unification and materialism. Within this reading of history, the event that best enabled this connection between past and present, between Rome and the Catholic world, was the martyrdom of St. Peter's, the first Pope, and St. Paul, apostle to the nation, propagator of Christian communities across the Roman Empire. The ceremonies of June 1867 in Rome took place almost at the same time as Exposition Universelle in Paris, Universal Exhibition, that same year. The liberal press accused the ultramontane media of trying to eclipse the celebration of civilization and progress with a medieval and intransigent ceremony. Faced with this criticism, the Civiltà Cattolica highlighted how Paris Exposition celebrated the triumph of the material over the spiritual, the slavery of passion, which is a worse slavery than that of paganism. The 18th centenary of St. Peter's and Paul became a global ceremony, followed by media across the world, at which attendance is estimated to have included 45 cardinals, 420 prelates, 18,000 clergy, and 150,000 visitors from across the world. On the 1st of July 1867, the prelates in attendance presented an expression of allegiance to the papacy. After some words of thanks, Pius IX capitalized upon the presence of the prelates to assert the authority of St. Peter's, as well as its central and global nature. The canonization took place within a new politics of holiness that Pius IX developed during his papacy, and which entailed a real milestone with the history of the Catholic Church, with a record number of canonization: 52 new saints during his pontificate and 222 beati, a figure only surpassed in the 20th century by Paul VI and John Paul II. Pius IX's program of beatification and sanctification exalted the memory of the martyrs of Judaism, and above all of the Reformation, as well as the memory of the missionaries who lost their lives in the farthest corner of the world. This was the case also for the collective canonization of the martyrs of Japan in Rome in June 1862. These politics of holiness were reinforced during the collective canonization of 1867. Their death as a testimony to their loyalty to the Pope's primacy, as well as their role in defending the integrity of dogma, was emphasized. Arbues' canonization is framed then within the search for past models for new battles. On this occasion, the history was recovered of a martyr who had largely been forgotten, who had never received devotion beyond the province of Zaragoza, and who had only appeared in discussions around the Inquisition. The start of the process, the canonization process of Arbues, took place only a year after the global success brought by the canonization of the martyrs of Japan. The initial impetus came from the Holy See itself, restoring an old cause that, after petition from Charles I and Philip IV, had culminated in his declaration as venerable in 1652 and blessed in 1664, as we will see with the lecture of Eliseo Serrano. In the 1860s, the intransigent ultramontane media began a campaign against liberal Catholicism with a harsh rebuke of the Secretary of the State, Cardinal Antonelli, of the Count de Montalembert for his speech, L'Église libre dans l'État libre. And above all, with encyclica Quanta Cura and the famous Syllabus Errorum of 1864. That same year, they dusted off an old dossier of a medieval cause which had lain forgotten since 1664, with the objective of combating liberalism and claiming pontifical infallibility. The controversy around the canonization of Pedro Arbues was decisive in defining the camps and who took which position before the open conflict of the early stages of the First Vatican Council. Some years later, in 1890, the prominent British liberal Catholic Lord Acton mentioned how the canonization of Arbues had been a turning point for the position of his friend Ignaz von Döllinger of Rome, the famous German theologian and instigator of the all Catholics split from Rome in Germany after the First Vatican Council, revealed publicly, although under a pseudonym, an ethical opposition to the canonization, and became fully conscious that the Holy See favored theologians who fought his position. Ignaz von Döllinger published 2 anonymous articles in the Allgemeine Zeitung in 1867 and in the Viennese Neue Freie Presse in 1868, in which he saw himself to be very critical of canonization, associating it with the movement that sought to consecrate infallibility and describing Arbues as a ruthless inquisitor who had written his name in blood in the annals of Inquisition. Döllinger argued that he had not been killed for his faith, but out of the hatred his violent repression had unleashed, and that, therefore, he could not be defined as a martyr. The 2 articles were reprinted in various European media, and as Döllinger himself indicated, they caused a great sensation in Rome. Rome's reaction was brutal. He was described as the head of the Munich school, which sought to use science and history against the authority of the Pope. The offensive against Döllinger began in La Civiltà Cattolica with a long reproving article, La canonizzazione del Beato Pietro de Arbues e l'Allgemeine Zeitung, in which, while not identifying the author, his position are openly censured as the distinguished Catholic who, at any cost, fights Rome, the Inquisition, and the Pope, and the distinguished scientist who offer magnificent proof of exquisite ignorance. The article exerts itself to demonstrate the inaccuracies of Döllinger's article in order to refute the idea that Arbues was a bloodthirsty inquisitor, discovering fabrication in its reference to the work of Ramo and in that of the chronicle from Aragon, Jerónimo Blancas. The controversy was even depicted artistically in the famous cartoon by Wilhelm von Kaulbach, Pedro Arbues condemns a heretic family to death by fire, exhibited in Munich in 1870, and published in Die Kartenlaube in 1872. Disciple of Peter von Cornelius, Kaulbach was director of the Münchner Kunstakademie and was known for his historical mural for the Neue Pinakothek München and the Neuen Museum in Berlin. For the latter, Kaulbach created a famous fresco, Das Zeitalter der Reformation, the Age of Reformation, in 1864, in which he praised the Protestant Reformation and associated it with the discovery of America, printing press, and humanism, that is, progress and civilization. Then the next, please. In Kaulbach's cartoon, Pedro Arbues appeared as a cruel old man, blind, and therefore incapable of judging what he sees, who, assisted by two helpers, sends a family to the stake while a monk collects money, and in the background, people are crucified and burned. In the image, in this powerful image that is in all the publicity of the Congress and the conference, Arbues has a saint halo in an open criticism of the canonization. Well, I don't know if you could see the halo.
Oh yeah,
yeah, you have also. It's easy for you to see there. Okay, in an open criticism of the canonization. In fact, the cartoon is inspired by Döllinger's article. The work, made between 1869 and 1870, was created in a very different context, since it is orientated more towards criticism of the First Vatican Council and the fight for the religious definition of the German nation. In his biography, Fritz von Ostini points out that Kaulbach's cartoon should be understood alongside two other contemporaneous images. The Tempel Austreibung, sorry, you can see what you have there.
See it here.
Okay. 1869, and the Deutsche Heilige Michel in 1873. In the first, Jesus appears in the biblical story of the expulsion of the merchant from the temple, except on this occasion, he throws the Pope from the temple, as well as the bishops who attended the First Vatican Council. The second, a little later, this one, released in 1873, though probably made before, represent the patron saint of Germany, Saint Michel, triumphantly expelling the Pope, Napoleon III, the Jesuits, and the Muslims from the German nation. This latter representation reveals perfectly the paradox of intolerance, which Lutheranism accusing Catholicism of intolerance, but fundamentally sharing the same religious hatred, in this case the Muslims, but also the Jews. They are also a Protestant anti-Semitism, as Olaf has also known. The image of Pedro Arbues made a ferocious impact. The people of Munich made pilgrimage to his studio to see the drawing of Arbues. Because of the death threats that the artist received, Munich is a Catholic place, as you have also pointed out, and is well known. The police even had to be called, and a barrier erected to separate the packed crowd from the illustration. Its publication in 1872 in the Gartenlaube would give a new meaning to the work in the context of the origins of Germany's Kulturkampf. Good evidence of that is the article, The Infallible and Holy Judge of Heretics, which preceded Kaulbach's image, stating that, and I think I have the quote also. No, it's not that quote, but let's now go back. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Until 1867, it was still possible to hold the comforting opinion that this terrible scourge of humanity was the consequence of a state of delirium, which, like the witch trials, had disappeared forever in the light of a healthier and more enlightened era. This consolation has disappeared. We must arrive at the depressing conclusion that the Inquisition is an essential part of the power of the hierarchy. The Pope is therefore accused, through this canonization, of having broken with the spirit of Christianity and equally with the profession of humanity. The text highlights the global and historical coincidence that on almost the same day, in July 1871, the Franco-Prussian War broke out and the Pope's infallibility was declared. And when it seemed that in both battlefields, ultramontane jubilation in victory could be heard, the German Empire rose free and with Protestantism at its head. Both the painting and the canonization were object of debate for the Jewish press. As Olaf Blaschke has demonstrated, the reaction of the Jewish media to Catholic anti-Semitism were highly varied in terms of their political and social orientation. To illustrate these tensions, however, this paper will focus on the case of the Allgemeine Zeitung des Judentums. When the beginning of the process of Arbo's canonization was made public, an acute commentary appeared about the plan to raise the Aragonese inquisitor to the altars. Instead of focusing on his cruelty, it endeavored to demonstrate that the establishment of Inquisition was not the product of a spiritual concern, but rather was the wish of the Catholic kings to strengthen their power and profit from their subjects' possession. In the same way, it dismantled the idea of a Jewish plot to indicate how the assassination of Pedro Arbues involved Aragonese noble who opposed that institution. In 1871, the Allgemeine Zeitung des Judentums dedicated an article to the exhibition in Berlin of Kaulbach's painting, which included a detailed description of the lithograph and indicated that originally it was presented as a protest against the canonization. The controversy surrounding Kaulbach's portrait continued, and in 1872, the Jewish periodical dedicated an article against ultramontane writers, in which it indicated, no, not yet. I don't know what has happened. Sorry. No, no. Okay. Sorry, I have forgotten to include these both texts. Sorry. And how it was interpreted by fanatics as an attack against the Catholic Church. As we all know, the ultramontanes wish to retain the freedom to harass, offend, and injure the whole world, but shout even louder if anyone allows them even the smallest response. Although it claims that the canonization is a slap in the face of history as well as humanity, it leaves the question to the freedom of the Church, and thus likewise with the criticism of Kaulbach's work, which are left to the judgment of public opinion, in order to focus on debunking anti-Jewish discourses which accuse them of financing the painter. So the Jews were blamed of paying for that paint by Kaulbach. Beyond the anti-Semitic stereotype, the pecuniary question occupied a central place in Vatican argument throughout the process of canonization. The prefect of the Sacred Congregation of Rites, in his speech to the Pope in the audience of July 1864, claimed that through the canonization of Arbues, God wanted to give a new triumph to the Catholic Church over the Jews who fought her with money and defamation. The Compendium Historiae Martyri also emphasized this idea that the canonization was opportune because it occurred at the same time in which the Catholics were attacked by the Jews who financed Masonic sects. The decree of canonization itself mentioned that the assassination was like that of Jesus Christ, whom the Jews sold for money, claiming that in Arbues' time the Jews fought the church with writings and money, as in the present. For the Civiltà Cattolica, the matter was clear. Arbues' triumph is a defeat for the Jews and the Judaizers. Instead, for two scholars, Stefan Samersky and Angela Berglis, Arbues' canonization was not directed as much against the Jews as a faith, but rather against Freemasons, anti-clericals, and Italian nationalists. As Olaf Blaschke has demonstrated, however, the anti-Semitism distilled within the Catholic discourses of those decades should not be minimalized. The anti-Semitic component is present in all discourses analyzed, even though it is sometimes useful to identify other targets, such as Freemasonry or Italian nationalism. On occasion, these enemies were conflated and identified as a part of the same plot, as different faces of the same conspiracy. At Charles Webb, and now I'm for sure it's there, okay. Quoting L'Univers, all the enemies of the church, be they Protestant or freethinkers, have used the same terms to defame the tribunal of the Holy Office. Pierre d'Arbois was a special inquisitor against converso Jews and marranos, against backsliders and Judaizers. The church canonized him at the same time as the Jews openly declared themselves against her. It is therefore natural that the Cassette d'Augsbourg, whose patrons are generally Israelites, should pronounce against the canonization of Pedro d'Arbois, since he is an enemy of the false and dangerous doctrines. The next one, a very similar reading can be found in the canonical biography by Giuseppe Cozza, when he inserts the martyrdom of Pedro d'Arbois in a long history of persecution suffered by the Catholic Church since its birth. This is the church against with the powers of hell and of the world conspiring together to harm her have always failed. This church, founded upon the word of God, has managed to conquer the storms that over 18 centuries have been unleashed upon her by persecution, by the wrath of heresy, by the fervor of sects, by the snares of politics. A mix. Upon the same promises, she will never waver, nor will she herself diminished by the changing of the ages. At her, all these fights and persecution from the Roman Empire to the 19th century via its confrontation with Jews, Muslims, Protestants, Jansenists, adherents of the Enlightenment, liberals and materialists, and then later on socialists and communists, and a long story of fighting, form part of one thing, that sempiternal battle between good and evil, in order to reinforce of the Catholic Church, were usually grouped together. This does not downplay any of the individual elements, but reinforces, you have pointed out in your presentation. And it's also so nostalgia for the Inquisition. That's the next one. In a letter from the Italian nationalist hero Garibaldi to Tesaroli on the 21st of July, 1867, published in La Riforma and reproduced in many European media of all political persuasion, the Italian nationalist leader condemned the imprisonment of his comrade Nodari by the Papal State, claimed that the time of Inquisition and of Pedro Arbois had passed, and threatened Rome's sovereignty with his troops. With this, by the end, Italians, Rome is there. Although Garibaldi's prophecy would soon be fulfilled, the process of Arbois' canonization demonstrated how, for a significant section of Catholicism, the Inquisition had not been discredited. This positive rehabilitation of the Holy See, of the Holy Office, strengthened anti-clerical perspective on the Catholic Church as an intolerant and anachronistic institution, which in turn strengthened, at the same time, its defense as an identifying feature for a section of Catholicism. The argument went beyond the existence of the Inquisition itself to propose a need for a tool that would make it possible to defend doctrinal integrity in the face of those who question it, both within and beyond Catholicism. The defense of the Inquisition was also made in practical terms as a lesser evil which saved Europe from civil wars. In an article on Arbois in the Dublin Review, it was pointed out that the institution saved Europe from being distracted by religious war, conciliated heretics, abolished crime, restored order, rescued by converting them hordes of criminals from the inexorable penal laws of the age. the defense of this position was essentially based on one of the great Catholic bestsellers of the 19th century, El protestantismo comparado con el liberalismo, by the Catholic apologist Jaime Balmes. Designed as an apologetic for Catholicism, this work revised the association between that faith, Catholicism, intolerance, and the Inquisition, and what constitutes one of the arguments that have most served the enemies of the Church to discredit her. To dismantle this thesis, Balmes tried to demonstrate how intolerance is not the exclusive preserve of Catholicism, citing numerous cases of religious violence in Anglicanism, in Protestantism, and Eastern Christianity, given that fundamentally religious intransigence is associated with a group that holds political power in its space. Of the most severe case of persecution of the Jews, Balmes indicated that hatred of the Jews was very popular at that time, at the time of the Inquisition. Although he accepts that the heart grieves when it reads the intemperate harshness with which the Jews were persecuted at the time, he suggests that there must have been some very, very serious reasons to provoke it. Among them was the danger to the Spanish monarchy, still not very well established. If it left the Jews to operate freely, who at the time were very powerful because of their wealth and their connection with very influential families. As well as the instability of the monarchy, he offered two other reasons for the creation of the Inquisition and the persecution of the Jews. The zeal of religious sentiment widespread at that time throughout Europe, and most particularly in Spain, and the conduct of the Jews themselves. He blamed the Jews for their behavior, who had brought public outrage upon themselves. Balmes focused especially on their wealth and the horrendous crimes, as we have already seen, of which with greater or lesser foundation they were accused. He doesn't care about if it's well-founded or not. Infanticide, desecration, poisoning, and so on. Although he recognized that many of these accusations could have been false, cases such as the death of Pedro Arbues show, according to Balmes, that the threat was real, that the Jews strived to organize themselves to confront the Christians, and that, as the logistic of his assassination proved, they were highly organized and could indeed be fatal were they not watched. So we have to watch for the Jews, because if not, we can found a rebellion or killing, mass killings, and other accusations. So in conclusion, the canonization of Pedro Arbues in 1867 has enabled us to observe the anxieties and challenges Catholics were facing leading up to the First Vatican Council. Firstly, we have seen how Arbues' canonization formed part of the politics of the past that the Holy See actively developed in the 19th century to find models and references in history which will help them in their fight in the present. Secondly, the canonization reveals the growing tensions that this plan would generate in the heart of Catholicism. Arbues' canonization was seen as a point of no return in the confrontation between ultramontanes and liberal Catholics. Arbues' canonization enabled us, moreover, to prove in the Catholic media there was a broad anti-Semitic streak which justified the persecution of Jews in the past and raised Pedro Arbues as a model for fighting Jews in the present. The fact that Jews were frequently seen as a part of a wider conspiracy that encompassed liberal Freemasons, and Italian nationalists should not lead us to underestimate this anti-Semitic component. Finally, the case of Arbues' canonization shows how a section of Catholicism partially reclaimed the legacy of the Inquisition. This involved, on one hand, demonstrating that religious intolerance was not the exclusive preserve of Catholicism. If everyone is intolerant, why we are not intolerant as well? That's a good question. And on the other hand, justifying its harness with the social and political context, the weakness of the monarchy and the hostility of Jews. Pedro Arguez featured simultaneously as a victim of the Jews and as an excuse for anti-Semitic religious violence on one side, and as an agent of violence and symbol of Catholic intolerance. The canonization ultimately demonstrated that not even religious tolerance was accepted by a section of Catholicism, and how the implementation of measures of tolerance and religious liberty were hobbled by the persistence of discourses of religious hate and by justifications for violence against other faiths in the past, which unfortunately was projected into the present. Many thanks. So I open the discussion for myself and you. If you agree. El micrófono lo puedes sacar, César. Hay un micrófono para hacer las preguntas. Anoto, I take questions. Pablo. Well, yeah. Okay. Ooh. Yeah, we have problems with the sound. If not, you can raise your. It doesn't work, no? Oh my God! Today is the technical issues days. No worries. No worries. No te preocupes, déjalo. Pablo, yeah, make the question. Strong voice, please.
I'll try my best. Thank you very much to both of you. I'd just like to start pointing out a big irony. I don't know if you are familiar with it, but do you know in which street is located today Madrid's Central Synagogue?
No.
Jaime Balmes. But my question is directed to Olaf. You spoke mostly of Catholic anti-Semitism in Germany, but I wonder what happens with the Protestant anti-Semitism. Javier pointed a little bit also to this. You can explain like it was a difference, it was less pronounced, or you just focus on Catholic anti-Semitism for your own interest. But I'm very curious to the extent and dimension of Protestant anti-Semitism. Also, I was just thinking when it's outside of the chronology maybe, but like when you point all these cases of blood libels and stories about legends about the ritual desacralization of the halls and things like that, it strikes me as very similar cases all around Europe. And at the time where there was a shared culture, but it was not the time of globalization. So how can we account for the similarity of all these cases? I mean, how they transmit? They follow a very, very clear and similar format, right? So you can just give me some hints about how is it possible that they repeat almost in the same way, both in, I don't know, in Segovia or in Germany or in Trent.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for your question. The Protestant anti-Semitism in Germany, the anti-Semitism of the dominant and hegemonic culture in Germany since Bismarck unified Germany, was the starting point of my research in a long time ago, 1989. Because this was clear. We knew when we were talking about anti-Semitism in the German Empire, all the examples were always Protestants, prominent Protestants, like Adolf Stöcker, who he was the Hofprediger, priest, the high priest, let's say in the court in Berlin, and there were other Hofpredigers. There were prominent figures in Protestantism. Heinrich Von Trejczyk, the historian of the Kaiserreich, unleashed the anti-Semitism discussion in 1879, writing an article as a Protestant, as a scholar, ending with the sentence, very often wrongly quoted, "Die Juden sind unser Unglück." The Jews are our fatal destiny, Unglück. The Jews are our unluck. I mean, something like that. I mean, it's not unluck, is it? It sounds a bit strange.
Bad luck?
Bad luck, yeah. The Jews will destroy us. It's something like that. But the sentence before says, many more and more bourgeois people say this, double point. So this sentence was printed on money, and it was in the National Socialist time a prominent sentence. So we knew so much about Protestant anti-Semitism, which was important for Protestants because their identity was not so profiled as in centralized Roman Catholicism. They needed even more somebody to beat, like if it's Catholics, if it's Jews, they needed enemies, and they beat each other, Reform Protestants, Orthodox Protestants, and so on. So anti-Semitism played a bigger role, and racism, and all these anti-Semitic parties, which started growing in 1879, 1880, which there were parties which were called Anti-Semitenpartei, and these people say, "My dear anti-Semites." I mean, in an election hall like this, we would say, "My dear anti-Semites." It was a positive noun for us. It's a negative noun, but then it was for them a positive noun. All Protestants, no Catholic among them, because they didn't need it, because they had their party. It was a central party. So this was all so well known that I started with, cannot be only Protestant, and this is why I started to study and find out that we have similar things in Catholicism, but all in all they were very similar. But the Protestants had more possibilities to try out things, to be a bit more racist, or to be even against anti-Semitism. They're much more heterogeneous, just as Protestantism is. The transnational question, yes, it is discussed. Konitz, Xanten, or Tisha Esler, it is discussed every day in the newspaper. So you get the template of what is a good story to invent a ritual murder, and we have this transnational, maybe even worldwide, but at least in Europe, phenomena in the 19th century because of the media in a lot of things. For example, the appearance of Mary. There's a bandwagon phenomenon. The first time was 1958. Was Mary in Lourdes. So and before there were cases, but after Lourdes, Mary was sort of homogenized. It was not anymore men who saw Mary like in the medieval time, but it was always women. So it was young women, innocent women, and she was wearing something white and not blue or anything else. So there was sort of like a matrix after Lourdes, how it should be, and whether it is in Eastern Poland or in Southern Italy, the things got more and more similar because the media and the priests and so on, they were all talking about it. And the same is happening with this ritual murder cases. This is a transnational phenomenon.
My question was like how, because in the 19th century, you explained it very well, like the media has the availability of replicating this template. But in the medieval period, there is a very similar replication also of these blood libels. So how can we explain in a less globalized world this
Okay, you're talking about the medieval. Your question was not about the 19th.
I'm sorry that I'm bringing you to a different chronological period, but as you start reflecting also on these cases, and how can we account for this?
I think
striking similarity.
if you look closer, the things in the beginning in the medieval time were very often very different. Yeah, they have maybe some similarities, but they always have some sort of original thing, you know. And then Trent was an important point in 1475. And this was, I mean, somehow there was also communication in the medieval time. No newspapers, but teaching of bishops and priests and so on. But still, things were very heterogeneous, and they grow. You know, one century later, maybe there's another thing added to this story, like the one in Zaragoza, which was supposedly happened in 1250. Hundreds of years, nobody ever heard about it. But in 1583, I mean, it was that late. 300 years later, more than 300 years later, yeah, suddenly the legend appeared. So things are added, and it is it looks for us now maybe more homogeneous than it actually was.
So Geraldine,
Yes, I'll be very brief because I see. I really wanted to thank you both and started. Javier, I have a remark and then I have a question for Olaf. For not a remark, but because I'm less familiar with your area of history, and I wanted to thank you for pointing out the divisions between the liberal Catholics and the ultramontanes on this specific point. Thank you very much. It was very illuminating. And I have a quick question. For Olaf, I wanted to ask also the Protestants anti-cis, so Pablo stole my question. But no, I wanted to ask you, and we've discussed this before, but can you say that the success of anti-Semitism was really linked to its adaptability, so its a constant capacity of reinvention? And for instance, would you say that in a way anti-Semitism was a secularized version of anti-Judaism? I know that you didn't say exactly this, but so can you say something about this perpetual reinvention of anti-Semitism or adaptability?
There's an historian. Shall I start?
Yeah, please. It was a remark.
Because I'm less familiar with his area of study.
There's a historian whose name I don't want to say. Yeah, you know who it is. Anyway, he's talking about anti-Semitism as an omnibus. An omnibus in I don't know whether you have the English word is a bus, you know, and the bus comes from omnibus, and from Latin, everybody can, you know, be in the bus. So this is exactly the adaptability that you're talking about. It is adaptable to a lot of other resentments, and very often, I think even most of the time, it is a sort of like a secondary resentment. The primary resentment is against somebody else. You want to attack the socialists, but you add the argument, well, the Jew Marx, or the Jewish leaders of the Socialist Party, and so on. You add it, which makes it even worse, but it was bad before. So it is adaptable to a lot of things, and I think this is important. And some scholars who study anti-Semitism may focus too much on it, so that they think, Daniel Goldhagen, of course, and so on, you know, so they think, oh, here you see all these anti-Semitism, so there's a direct path to Auschwitz. I wouldn't say so. You know, if you would have asked people around 1900, where is anti-Semitism more vivid, in Germany or France, everybody would have said, and where would something like Auschwitz be possible? Everybody would have said France, because the Jews came from East, from Russia and so on, and in order to look for asylum in Germany, not in France. In France, there was this Dreyfus affair, and the anti-Semitism had this function, you know, of a cultural code. This is the argument of Schuller-Volkow, dividing societies into those who were pro and those who were anti-emancipation. And you could hear from the language and from the lines in between, you know, Emile Zola and so on, you could hear on which side you are. Are you pro or against emancipation in general also, not only for the Jews? So it played a role, it has a function, but it had a function. It's anti-Semitism was very much of a functional thing. And this is, last sentence, the reason why the anti-Semitic parties were not successful. They had only one point, you know, they said we are against Jewish emancipation, we should do something against, and they had at the high time in 1893 about 3% of the voters. 3% is not really much. The only thing you have to see is that they were winning their area. You had to get over 50%, and then you can send somebody into the parliament. So in Thüringen, later on, the field of the Deutschchristen, the German Protestant wing that was really brown and pro-Nazi, in Thüringen, and today Thüringen, yeah, less vaccination, so there are continuities. In Thüringen, the anti-Semites must have won one district after another, you know, because they went over 50%. But otherwise, anti-Semitism is a marginal phenomenon.
So I have this question. Please be brief because we are. So Valentin first and then Xavi. Maybe you can do both the question and then we answer.
Merci beaucoup pour la clarification des termes et les propositions double antisémitisme, etc. En France, à l'époque dont vous parlez, le journal La Croix avait pour sous-titre le journal le plus anti-juif de France. Donc on a là une connexion directe avec le catholicisme intégraliste à l'époque, avec WWU et compagnie. Là encore, cet anti-judaïsme, antisémitisme, ça reste quand même mouvant parce que c'est aussi à la même époque que l'affaire Dreyfus. Donc c'est vrai que c'est intéressant d'essayer de faire des catégories, mais c'est... Enfin bon, pour moi, les catégories ne sont pas aussi nettement distinguées.
You're absolutely right. Can I? Okay. You wanted another question?
If it's a short answer.
You're right. Lacroix mixes these things, and it's always our perspective if we distinguish the things, build categories in order to analyze things. But even the Nazis, who were not, he didn't give a damn about whether Jesus was crucified by Jews and didn't care about all these anti-Judaistic things. But Der Stürmer, which was the most propagandistic journal, and had hate speech every week, built on the ritual murder cases. So basically, their idea was, the Aryan race should get better and get rid of the Jews. It's a matter of blood and racial purity. But they dwelled on all these Catholic medieval things, and so even they mixed it. It's us who analyze it. Yeah.
Xavi?
Thank you for your presentation. I convinced. So just short questions for both of you.
Can you when you speak, it's clearer. Thank you.
Just two short questions for each of you. For Olaf, this the economic dimension of anti-Semitism, usually is this dimension, this economic dimension of anti-Semitism or anti-Judaism, is also modernized in the 19th century. It's a century in which the meaning of economy is changing a lot. So maybe no, or is it not important for this Catholic anti-Semitism? No. And for Javier, you have explained the transnational dimension of the canonization process of Southwest, and I think it's pivotal. I agree with you. But my question is how this process was read from Spain, because 1867 is a very delicate year. We are on the verge of a revolution, and I mean how it was received in Spain, and how it affected the debates, political debates in Spain. Yeah.
You first.
Not first. Please.
You mean?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. It is definitely modernized in the course of industrialization, capitalization, and so on. There was always an economic argument, even in the medieval times, that Jews are usurers, but they exploit farmers and whatever, and you have debts, and they just want to have back too much money. So a ritual murder once in a while, getting rid of all the Jews, could help. So that you don't need to pay back the money. But in the 19th century, we have a completely different situation. The ordinary usurer is put on a higher level. It is now the one who's exploiting as a boss of a bank, or on the stock market, or as some sort of anonymous sources, and Rothschild is very often a name there to personalize it a bit, an international network of Jewish clans who govern the stock market and the banks, and the money that is a completely, let's say, a completely different playing level. So this anti-capitalist resentment now finds a projection in the Jews. It's not only economic, it's also political, and it's also cultural. So in German, I always say Weltmacht, Geldmacht, Geltungsmacht, because it's such a nice alliteration. I have 3 chapters about that. Weltmacht, they want to govern the world. Geldmacht is the money, and Geltungsmacht, it's a term from Max Weber, saying that they want to that they want their standards and culture and so on to in the newspapers and so on to dominate. So culturally, so in all these levels, not only money, the former traditions are modernized. Yeah.
Okay, I enjoyed the question to present the next session that we will have because I mean I'm sure that Joseba Luzao, who is now here, is going to speak about all the national dimension, because we split the domains to speak about. Pedro Arbues, I delve into the transnational question, how it was perceived in the broader context of Catholicism in the 60s and so on. But obviously, as all the Inquisition reflections and so on, this is a part that is clearly connected with the freedom of worship during the sexennial, during the next phase of the revolution, this period, the revolutionary period in Spain. And obviously they discussed the case of Pedro de Arbues in that context. But still, I think that Joseba will ask better to that question. And also, we will have also the Eliseo Serrano presentation also on Arbues in the early modern time.